Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188. Welcome to Gardening with Burke Nursery, the show where we help you grow your garden, increase the curb appeal of your yard, and share information on all plants. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris, the horticulturalist at Burke Nursery and Garden Center. Some of the most majestic and awe-inspiring plants, such as elephant ears and dahlias, are often given a back seat to other summer perennials and annuals. Or they're just seen as old-fashioned. These summer blooming bulbs are often just what your garden needs to give it that unexpected wow factor. So take time today to learn more about the magnificent summer bulbs, elephant ears, and dahlias. When gardeners think of bulbs, you usually think of tulips, daffodils, or crocus. The bulbs that pop up in spring because you plant them in the fall. Yet, there are a lot of bulbs that you plant in the spring because they bloom June through the first fall frost. These are bulbs that have a special impact. Elephant ears, caladiums, dahlias, canna, or as some people call it, canna lily, gladiolus, lily of the valley, calla lily, and Asian lilies. Since our time today is limited, I want to focus on my two favorites, elephant ears and dahlias. So let's begin with my favorite of the two, which is actually the elephant ears. And the elephant ears are called elephant ears because of the shape of the leaves. They're huge, and also the size of the plant is huge. It can be anywhere from 3 feet to 10 feet tall, and the leaves, or the width of the plant actually, can be anything from 2 to 10 feet wide. The leaves are as long as, some of them are actually 3 feet long, and the rule of thumb is the larger the bulb, the larger the plant. So I'd like to show you a picture first here of the Alicosia. And the Alicosia has upright leaves. And if you look at the leaves, they just seem to be reaching for the sky. They're kind of going like, ah, Alicosia. The other picture that I'd like to show you is the Colocosia. And the Colocosia, the leaves here, they dip downward and they point down. Yet both of these plants are huge. As a matter of fact, there's one Colocosia that is so large that the stems are like 3 inches to 6 inches round, just the stems alone. So there is much to be said about these elephant ears. And where can you plant them? Well, that's the nice thing that I found with the the summer blooming bulbs, is that a lot of them can either be planted in your garden or they can be planted in containers. And so what you want to do is you want to, if you plant them in your garden, wait until the temperatures are 60 degrees, and I'm talking soil temperatures. Usually the soil temperatures reach 60 degrees when about 2 or 3 weeks after when the forsythia blooms. And the forsythia tends to bloom when the soil temperatures are around 55 degrees. So you're not that far off, and that really is the time of spring. Also, it helps if the last chance of that spring frost has passed. So oftentimes that's seen as Mother's Day, which is around mid-May. Some people also say that they wait until they plant their tomatoes, and that they know when they plant their tomatoes is when they can also plant their summer bulbs. So there's these little things that you can think about. Think about the forsythia 2 weeks later, or think about tomato plants and when you can put them out safely to plant them. The best place to plant them is either full sun or to plant them in part shade. And depending on, sometimes people like to go out and search different websites to see where to plant something. And so you'll find that some areas will tell you plant them in full sun. But if you're in an area where it's a very hot location and a very humid location, then a little bit of shade definitely, because too much sun could start drying them out. Why? The alocasia likes to have moist soil, well drained but moist. Meanwhile, the colocasia is actually a bog plant. It likes to be near water. And both the elephant ears, both type of elephant ears, can be considered invasive in Florida and along the Gulf Coast because of all the moisture and all the water. So they just are amazing. Now, they are deer resistant. And part of that is that the raw plant is actually very poisonous. Yet in Asian cooking, the Asians will actually take the elephant ear, and they do use it as a culinary, but it has to be fully cooked so that all the poison is removed from the plant. And what I'd like to do now is show you the bulbs of the elephant ears. This bulb is the alocasia. And the alocasia is almost a conical shape. So looks almost like a little evergreen tree. And it's very easy with an alocasia to tell where the tip is for when you're doing the planting. The base is very easy because you can see the roots here on the alocasia. And with any bulbs, you always want to plant root down. The elephant ear, the colocasia, there's several sizes. And this is where I was talking about the bigger the size, the bigger the plant. These are all colocasias. So these are the ones that have the leaves that droop down, where the others have the leaves that, the alocasia, the leaves go up. One of the biggest questions that I get at the nursery with the colocasia elephant ears is, how do I tell where is the top and where is the bottom? Because it's very circular. So the way you can tell the top from the bottom is that the top is very circular here. And so that's where the actual plant is going to come from. Meanwhile, turn it around, and the base here is very, very gnarly. And this is where the roots are going to come from. And I can show you this gnarliness on the smaller one as well. So think gnarly, and that's your roots. Think circular, and that's your leaves and where your leaves come from. When you're planting this in the ground, you need to make sure that you're digging this deep enough and follow the label instructions, because some of these only want to be planted 1 inch below the surface, and some of these bulbs want to be planted 3 inches below the surface. And while fertilizing in the ground is not necessary, they do need their moisture, especially the colocasias. They really need a lot of moisture. Like I said, they're basically bog plants. And if you want to plant them in a container, then this is where you really need to take a look at the container, because you want a container or a pot that's 18 inches deep. And I thought about getting a yardstick and bringing that in and showing to you, and then I decided, no, let me just take out the pot and show you the pot. This is the size pot if you're going to be planting elephant ears. This is 18 inches deep. It's a little wider than 18 inches. And I recommend that before you put any soil in the pot, that you actually put in about, with this pot, I would say about 3 inches deep, put in rocks. The purpose of the rocks is to make sure that when there's a heavy wind, the wind doesn't take and knock over the whole pot, because this plant becomes very, very top heavy, and the whole pot could just fall over if you don't have rocks in here. The potting mix that you want to use, any type of potting mix will be all right. In the pot, what you want to do is fertilize it with a 10-10-10 or a 5-10-5 or any type of fertilizer where the center number is either equal to the first and third number, or the center number is a little higher than the first and the third number. Never fertilize it with a lot of nitrogen fertilizer. That means if that first number is the highest, that's a high nitrogen fertilizer. And elephant ears don't like high nitrogen. So please, don't let them grow. So just keep the pot moist, keep the pot watered. On windy days, you may actually have to water it twice because the wind whips water out of the pots. So there's the pot for the elephant ears. Oops, let's make a little noise. And the one thing with all summer bulbs, they do not last in our zone. So if you live in zone 8 through 12, yes, they'll work in the garden year round. But if you live in Northern Virginia, which is where I live, with zone 7A, they need to be moved out of the ground, or if I have them in a pot, I can actually take it into the house, and I have a beautiful house plant that's very tropical in nature. What you do is you wait until first frost to take them out of the ground. You cut back any stems to about 6 inches. Then you take it and let it dry out, because you don't want a moist bulb. If there's any soil around the roots, remove the soil. Let it dry out maybe a week or two, and then after it dries, then just put it and store it in vermiculite, and you'll have it to plant next spring. As I was talking about elephant ears, and elephant ears being one of my favorite summer blooming bulbs, I also mentioned that dahlias are another favorite summer blooming bulb for me, or tuber if you will. Dahlias are very, very long blooming. They will usually start blooming in mid-July, although there are some cultivars that will start blooming in June, and they will bloom until first frost, which could be sometimes October, sometimes even as late as November. They are wonderful pollinators. Not only do they attract bees, but they attract hummingbirds, they attract butterflies. They're fantastic to use in any kind of pollinator garden or any type of butterfly garden. And according to the American Dahlia Society, there are over 42 what we call recognized species, and also some subspecies. And dahlias have had a long history, and they're really a very what I like call historic plant, but there are also a lot of them out in the wild. And until they started ranking them, people were saying there were over 100 different types of dahlias. And there are over 15 different colors of dahlias as well. The colors are white or red. The only color about that you really won't get is a deep, deep blue. You get beautiful purple, and it's just phenomenal. And I'd like to show you some pictures of a few types of dahlias. The first picture is what is often called the formal decorative type of dahlia. And this is the one that I think most people recognize most often when they look at the dahlias. Also, it's very similar looking to what they call the pon-pon, which is, again, a global dahlia. And dahlias can grow anywhere from a few inches to 4 or 5 feet tall. It's just phenomenal as far as the height. The next dahlia, this is what is known as a single type of dahlia. And the single dahlia reminds me almost of a soft petal rose. And it is just very gorgeous. There's even a dahlia that's called a peony dahlia and looks very similar to the peonies. And then another dahlia, and this one is phenomenal, the collarette. And there's only so many pictures that I could show you of the dahlias. And so this one red with the petals on the outside and then yellow petals and that bright orange corona. There's others with purple and white on the inside. There's so many collarettes. And then another favorite is what is known as the cactus. And the cactus is all frilly. The leaves are frilly, just amazing. So you have as many dahlias as you want. And the width of the flowers is amazing because the width of the flowers, I was saying they could grow up to 5 feet tall. There's actually some that will grow 7 feet tall. And some flowers will actually be 14 inches. Amazing. They do prefer sun, full sun. If the location is very hot, you may want a little partial shade. Like your other summer bulbs, they can be planted in either containers, pots, or directly into the ground. And they do, for the most part, they actually need staking. And they also like a rich, well-drained soil. What is critical is if you get a drought, then you need to actually water it during a drought. And if you decide to plant it in a container, then the container needs to be about 14 inches deep, and this is also 14 inches. And also, again, because the dahlia can grow so tall, if you put it in a container, again, I recommend putting some rocks at the base of the container to stabilize the container. And the other thing is if you go for the large dahlias, the dinner plate dahlias, which are 7 to 14 inches, just the flower head, you will need to stake them even in a pot. So take that into consideration when you're looking at how you want to plant your dahlias. So what I have here is I have here a dahlia. And even though they're called bulbs, dahlias are tubers. Technically, the elephant ear that I showed you earlier in the show was a corm. And so bulbs, basically, the definition of bulbs is any storage system that a plant has that's underground. So all the food is stored in these tubers, the water is stored in these tubers. And when you get your dahlia, and I have to admit, the first time that I ever planted a dahlia, I was a little frightened because I looked, and with some dahlias, you'll only get one tuber. And with other dahlias, such as this one, this one has 3 tubers. But this is not where the dahlia comes from. You have to make sure that when you plant your dahlia, that it has what we call eyes. so it can see where it's going to grow, is how I like to say it. And the eyes are not at the tubes at all. If you have tubers but no eyes, you're not going to get a dahlia. So where do you look for the eyes? Up here. This is the stem of the dahlia. And the eyes form right around the area where the stem meets the tubers. So you need to make certain that when you purchase any of the dahlia tubers, dahlia bulbs, that you have the stem and you have the eyes. It's difficult with all the soil around this dahlia to see where the eyes are. So what I did is these tubers are potatoes. And what I did is I brought these potatoes so that you could see the eyes of the potatoes right there. And when you look closely at your dahlia, this is what you'll be seeing. You'll be seeing these eyes here. And that's what you want to see. When you plant the dahlia, you want to dig the hole large enough, and the dahlia you only want 1 inch of soil. So you want the dahlia 1 inch below what I call the soil level. And there you have it. That's how you plant and look for the right kind of dahlias. So when we, dahlias again, because dahlias are summer bulbs, what that means is that, like the elephant ears or like any summer bulbs, you are going to need to remove this from the soil when it comes time for first frost. So these will bloom until first frost, which I mentioned was like October, November. Then after the first frost, if you have them in a pot, let the pot dry out. That'll be a lot easier. If you have them in the ground, then dig them up. And when you dig them up, you'll want to gently remove the soil. And the reason I say if they're in a pot, then if you let that pot dry out, it'll be easier to get the soil off. After that, oh, and one of the things you may hear some people say, I do not recommend this, but you may hear some people say, oh, I just take a hose and wash off all the soil off the dahlia tubers. I do not recommend that because that risks the tubers getting too moist and not drying out properly. Because again, after you take this out of the ground, you'll want to put these aside for about a week or two and then shake off any more soil that may be there, let them dry out, and what you will want to do is put them in a bag of vermiculite. And I don't recommend a plastic bag because a plastic bag enables moisture to get trapped, so I recommend a paper bag, or some people will get a mesh bag, anything that lets a little air circulation occur during the winter months. And other people will leave them in the containers, and what they'll do is they will also have them as houseplants. But the dahlias are a little harder to have as houseplants. Oh, and I did forget to mention that it's important after you take the dahlias out of the ground that you cut back the leaves and just leave a couple inches of the leaf there. And you do not cut back the stem because, as I said, that's where the eyes are. And you definitely don't want to lose the eyes. So then come spring, all you have to do is you can take a look and see if you want to divide them, or you can plant them as is in the ground. And the one thing I did forget to mention is that because summer bulbs like to be planted preferably outside in May, a lot of people will purchase them in March because that's when the best selection is available, and they will plant them in containers And then what they will do is they will transfer them from the container in March, that they planted them in March, and put them into the ground in mid-May. Elephant Ears and Dahlias are only two of the summer blooming bulbs that you'll find. They look great in the garden. They grow well in containers. And what's wonderful is the magnificent statement they make, whether it's in your yard or on a patio. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris. If you have any plant or gardening questions, contact me at misty@burkenursery.com. I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me here at Gardening with Burke Nursery. I'm looking forward to helping you grow your garden.
Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.